A big hello to our listeners. Welcome back to the eLearning Champion Pod, where we dive deep into strategies, trends, and triumphs shaping the world of digital learning. Are you seeking to create impactful and engaging e-learning experiences? Do you want to stay ahead in this rapidly evolving landscape? If so, you've come to the right place. In today's episode, we're exploring engagement in learning design with none other than Dr. Clark Quinn. Welcome, Dr. Quinn. We're thrilled to have you here.
An honor to be here with you. Thank you.
Clark Quinn is the Executive Director of Quinnovation, Board Advisor to Elevator 9, and Co-Director of the Learning Development Accelerator. With more than 4 decades of experience at the cutting edge of learning, Dr. Quinn is an internationally known speaker, consultant, and author of 7 books. He combines a deep knowledge of cognitive science and broad experience with technology into strategic design solutions that achieve innovative yet practical outcomes for corporations, higher education, not for profit, and government organizations. It is no surprise that we at ComLabs are big fan of it is no surprise that we at ComLabs are big fan of his work.
Thank you very much for that gracious introduction. I will just sit here and crawl off. Thank you.
No. So, dear listeners, before we dive in, make sure you never miss an episode packed with valuable tips, inspiring stories, and latest industry buzz by clicking that follow button. All right, time to get started with incredible learning engagement. So, Dr. Quinn, I'd like to start with what exactly is engagement?
Well, in cognitive science, we actually recognize that there's more than just the cognition. We talk about 3 things. And the first one is the cognition, and that's the knowledge we have, the things we know how to do. The second thing is affect, who we are. And that's largely been tied to personality. And I don't mean MBTI. I don't mean a bunch of those other personality things. The only one that's really psychometrically recognized is the Big Five, or Ocean, now sort of modified to Hexaco. And it has its flaws as well. But that's considered relatively immutable. And the third area is what they call conation, which is our intent to learn, our willingness to invest effort in whatever it is we're choosing to do. And that, in the case of learning, that means you're willing to take the effort, do the steps that are involved in the practice. And so that's what I like to mean by engagement, is that you're cognitively and emotionally immersed in the experience. And we are typically used to addressing the cognitive side, but not the other side, the conative side. And I use emotions as a shorthand to refer to a bunch of aspects of that really aren't emotions, but it's to separate away from the cognitive, because conation is a term not many people know. It's not click to see more. It's not video, solves all problems. It's not random knowledge tests. Those aren't actually truly engaging. What is engaging is your curiosity and your recognition that this is worth it to you. That's what I mean by engagement.
Wow. Okay. Right. So, why should we consider engagement so critically in learning design?
Well, that intent to learn, that willingness to engage in it, is critical to being successful. If you don't open up people emotionally to being ready for the learning, to being willing to invest, everything you do is going to they may as well be coated with Teflon. It's just not going to stick. So we actually know that when people are emotionally engaged, they learn better. And so the short answer is you get better outcomes when you consider engagement as part of your learning design. And I think, to me, learning experience design, which is sort of a new phrase if you've been around a long time, to me is the elegant integration of the cognitive side of learning and the emotional side of learning, and understanding how they work together and leveraging that to create an experience can be truly transformational, not just instructional.
Right. Yes. So, how do we generate the initial motivation to participate?
Well, we need to get people willing to engage. What does
Right.
that take? I like to use a fishing metaphor, and I'm not a fisher person, so I probably munge it up a bit, but we need to initially hook them, and then we will
Right.
need to land them. But first, to hook them, how do we do that? And I suggest people have to have three things. The first thing is they have to acknowledge that they need this.
Right.
This is something I really do need. Then the second aspect is we need to address, but I already know it. If they think they already know it, we have a barrier to learning. This isn't always going to
Right.
be the case, but in certain instances, we can face that, and we have to be prepared to address that if our survey of the audience, our audience analysis tells us that we will indeed have to go in and help learners recognize that they don't know this. There's a
Right.
third element we need as well, and they have to believe that this experience will change that lack of knowledge,
Right.
or lack of skill, really. And to be fair, we have lost a wee bit of credibility when we're in the circumstance where will pay their kids to click through required learning rather than actually doing it. We have a problem, and so we may have to work extra hard initially to regain that trust. But if we
Right.
start applying this reliably and regularly, we can address that, and we should. So we need to, how do we get that initial, I need this? I suggest it's through showing the consequences of having or not having the knowledge. So the
Right.
positive consequence of having the knowledge or the negative consequence of not having the knowledge. And you can do that humorously or dramatically. And I
Right.
have a bent to humorously show the consequence of not having the knowledge. That sort of black humor is me, but that's not appropriate for all audiences, and that's what should drive it. But what is going to motivate them is dramatically or humorously recognizing that they will benefit from having this or they will be hurt by not having this.
Right. Interesting. The initial motivation requires delivering on the promise, right? So, how do we do that?
That's what I mean by landing. And we really have to, we have set up an expectation that we are going to create a situation where they will acquire these skills. And so
Right.
we have to deliver on that promise. And that means we have to do a number of things. What we give them, both in content, and content is really a shorthand for a couple different things, but we have to make sure that that's relevant. They get that it's relevant. And then we have to make sure that we are, that the practice they are doing, they recognize as being those practicing the skills they know they need to know, and it needs to be pitched
Right.
at the right level of challenge. There's a bunch of nuances that go into it, but basically it's having appropriate practice, the minimal recognizable content, and progressing them through that experience in a way that they recognize leads to them to transformation.
Right. Right. So, in the same line of thought, what makes meaningful practice?
So, as I suggested, it's got to be at the right level of challenge. But the
Right.
first thing is what they are doing, what they have to actually, the choices they have to reflect the decisions they will make afterwards. And on my
Right.
editorial soapbox, I will suggest that what will make a difference to the organizations your listeners need to have for their organization will be the ability to make better decisions.
Right.
Knowing, being able to recite facts doesn't lead to the ability to do. We have robust results that show that. And so it's very rarely that the ability to recite facts is going to make a difference to an organization. It's going to be the ability to make decisions. And to do that, you need to have people practice making those decisions. So that's what
Right.
the each practice should be. And it can be, the ideal practice is live mentored, live mentored performance. So you're doing things and getting feedback. But early on, that can be problematic. Individual
Yes.
mentoring is expensive, doesn't scale well. And the cost of getting it wrong in live
Mm.
situations could be rather onerous. So instead,
Right.
we create artificial situations, simulations, and we can even do that with, we can do that with full engine driven, simulation driven experiences like games. We can do it just with branching scenarios. We can even do it with better written multiple choice questions. And if
Right.
nothing else, I implore your learners to please start writing better multiple choice questions that are actually mini scenarios that say, you're in this situation. You have these three different choices of action. Which one do you do? Not what is this situation?
Right.
Not, what
Right.
does this look like? What are you going to do? And when you have that, even better at multiple choice questions can work. So you need to put them in a context. And we have
Mm.
research again that shows that when people are actually performing in context, they learn better than they learn on abstract problems, which leads us to question why then in schools do we give kids abstract problems? But we're not on an educational reform mission right now on this call. Um,
Right.
and then the decisions need to be pitched at the right level for where the learner is.
Correct.
Early on, it should be relatively coarse discriminations they're making. Later on, it should be finer discriminations. And what really matters as well is the feedback they get that helps them
Correct.
recognize that if they made a wrong choice, why was that the wrong choice? And by the way, most mistakes people make are not random. We have a little randomness in our
Mm.
architecture, it's evolutionarily adaptive, but we tend to make pattern mistakes. And you can see this
Oh.
in when you ask, yeah, when you ask your, you know, the supervisors of the learners and say, what is it? And they go, oh, they always make this mistake. They always make that mistake. As a learning designer, that's a wonderful piece of information
Right.
because now you know the things to build into your learning situation to test to make sure they don't know it, or if they make that mistake, to tell them why it's wrong. It tends to be from bringing in wrong models. So we need to make sure that, again, we're having the right decisions at the right level of challenge and set in context they recognize. They can be fantastic, set in Wild West or outer space or whatever, but the decisions have to be recognizable to the learners as the ones like they're going to have to make.
Right. Correct. So we spoke about context. Now, coming to content, what makes the content meaningful?
Right. So I mentioned models. We use mental models. Just to step back, there's a problem when we just talk about content. And in general, our industry does have a habit of talking about content, and that seems to think that that's anything. And from a learning perspective, we actually know that there's two critical types of pieces of content, and understanding that's important. And the first one are mental models. These are explanatory stories of how the world works. They are
Right.
conceptual because they're abstract, and they're causal, and they have relationships between the elements that explain how the world works. And we use these because we can say, if I do this, this happens. If I do
Right.
that, that happens. This is better than that. I'm going to do this. And you can't make those predictions without causal models. So they
Right.
provide a better basis for making decisions. And we don't think about these enough. And we should make sure that we have good models. Now, they're conceptual, and I said concrete situations are better for practice. This is true for models as well. How do we make models comprehensible? The other part of content is examples. And this is showing models in context. I faced this problem. I applied this model, it led to this solution. It might be a
Right.
bad model and a bad outcome, but if you have a risk of overgeneralization where people might apply the models beyond where they should, you will need to perhaps show negative examples to keep them from going too
Right.
far. But
Correct.
you also want the spread of context they see in the examples and practice together to support appropriate transfer to all the situations you need them to go to. But examples are good stories, really, and they should be to be engaging. They should be good stories about what happened, and they should be interesting stories. And
Right.
we can do that. We may have to exaggerate the stories we're told, but Your experts will hopefully tell you good stories about success. They may struggle to tell you stories about their failures. They may not feel that safe. Ideally, we make it safe. But the other thing is to have them tell stories about others' failures, and they're more
Right.
likely to do that. So, and when we do that, models and examples, the final element that's really important is to make that minimal. Use the minimal set of information to get them to succeed.
Right. Interesting. So now that we spoke about making getting content into place, what makes a more meaningful closing?
Right. We've opened the experience with that hook, right? We made a promise. There's
Right.
several other cognitive things we're supposed to do with an opening as well. We're supposed to activate relevant knowledge. So that, although that hook, that showing that consequences probably will do that anyways. We want to make sure if they have expectations about the experience and you're going to violate them, you want to address that up front. You don't want them confronting a disconnect between the experience they are expecting and what they're having, because that'll interfere with the learning. So if you're going to, that's probably not a problem. They probably know what to expect. Although upfront initially, if you're going to be doing more challenging problems than they're expecting, we have this habit of asking random bits of knowledge. That's not
Right.
good. So, but we set this up. They go through the practice, and at the end, they've gone through an emotional trajectory, and we tend to not address that. We ignore that, and
Right.
that's not good. So, a good closing has to do the cognitive things. It should show what you're now enabled to do, where further directions are for you. It should show you, how to go deeper. If you really got curious about X, Y, or Z and you couldn't cover it that much in the learning, you want to give them the opportunity to dig more depth. But you also want to close the emotional experience we've opened. You want to acknowledge their effort. They've spent time. They've
Right.
maybe made mistakes. Now, ideally, you personalize this for them, but then you let them know, celebrate that they have now accomplished something. They now are a member. I suggest possibly even introducing them to the community they're now a part of. And
Right.
we can cement their, acknowledge, cement their experience with an acknowledgement that could be a ritual. We can have them, in lots of famous types of interpersonal things, they'll have people walk across fire. And it turns out it's not
Right.
really dangerous, but it signifies that they've accomplished something. And even just have them step over a line to join. There are lots of things you can do. So you just want to make sure that you close the experience instead of just going, okay, you're done. That's not enough.
Right. Right. Interesting and very important too. So now that we looked at making a closing, what are the potential barriers to engagement?
Right. First of all, people have to care about this and be willing to invest.
Right.
You need to make the case that it leads to better outcomes, and
Correct.
so it's worth the investment. Granted, you know, my long-term story is it doesn't take a lot of extra time to do this, but it
Right.
will at first. I have to acknowledge that because it takes a while for that new way of doing things to become cemented in your own experience. You're a learner in this instance as well. But as you do, you're not really doing anything different than what you did before. You're still doing an upfront analysis. You're just adding a little extra information, and you're still creating practices and content and closings and a
Right.
trajectory. You're just paying more attention to certain nuances that are important. So it's not going to take a longer time. But getting people to understand that this is a worthwhile investment for you to go through that speed bump of,
Right.
of initial slowdown before you get back into tune is going to take some effort. You have to know these elements. I mean, and it's funny, learning science is finally becoming aware. There's more and more books on it. But as I
Right.
said, I think learning experience on the elegant integration of learning science with engagement. And I looked for what there is on engagement and I didn't find enough, which is why I wrote the book, Make It Meaningful, which talks about all this. But
Right.
whether you do it through that book or any other way, you have to know what the elements are. And then you have to, so you need to be aware that this is important. You need to actually get the commitment to do it. And then you need to make sure you're able to execute on it.
Right. Interesting. So how can one get started on this?
Well, I think it's really important um, famous concept is a forcing function. So if you need to remember to bring something to work, if you put it so that it's literally blocking your ability to open the front door to go outside to work, you're more likely to remember that, oh, I need to bring this with me. I think that's
Right.
important in learning design as well. So you need to bake it into your practices so that it's just an automatic part of what's expected. You put it into your templates. If you have
Right.
storyboards, say, have a space in your introduction. What is our emotional hook in your practice? How have you checked to make sure it's relevant? So building it in is makes it easier for this to become an automatic part of your practice. And that is an essential part of actually being able to do this successfully, reliably, repeatably. We work better. Our brains are really good at pattern matching and meaning making. We're really bad at
Right.
remembering little bits and pieces. That's why we create tools like checklists and things. Put it into your
Right.
checklist. Put it into your practices. That will make it that much more. If you're listening now, you've already got the awareness of why this is important and what it is. You just need to start making it part of what you do. And the
Right.
easier it is to
Wow.
automate that, the more likely it is to happen.
Right. Interesting. Yes. And that brings us to the end of our questions and another insightful episode of the eLearning Champion podcast. We've covered a lot today, from cognitive load and engagement hacks and what could be the possible barriers and how our listeners can get started. I hope everyone is walking away with some fresh ideas and actionable steps to elevate your e-learning engagement. Thank you so much for your valuable insights and stories, Dr. Quinn.
No worries. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about this, which is clearly a passion of mine. And it makes me emotional, right? So I'll just close and say, stay curious, my friends.
Wow, yes. So stay curious, our e-learning champions. Remember, becoming an e-learning champion is a journey of continuous learning. And if you found today's episode valuable, please do share this episode with someone who you think could benefit. And find us on your favorite social media platforms. We'd love to keep the conversation going. Thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time, happy learning.